The Akeidat Yitzchak, the binding of Yitzchak, which has extreme spiritual significance. It's there to be read daily. And, we're reading obviously the story of the great accomplishment of Avraham and Yitzchak. Both were involved in this great challenge. Because remember, Yitzchak was 37 years old, not a small child as, perhaps secular ideology would present it as. But he was 37 years old, he was an adult. And he also sacrificed himself to be a sacrifice, to be a korban. He was willing to give his life as well. So Yitzchak was accomplishing a lot in his own right, in the challenge from his perspective. And Avraham, of course, being able to give over his son was a tremendous accomplishment, considered to be one of the greatest test, perhaps, that he was challenged. The rabbis tell us that Avraham was, in fact, tested 10 times, this being the last and most difficult of the tests, according to most. So in his ability to fulfill the will of God in doing this was a tremendous accomplishment. For example, we know that in order to hear prophecy, one has to be in the right state of mind. One has to be besimcha. One can't be depressed or angry, because then he would block the channel of prophecy. So one could argue and say, perhaps we can understand just what level of Avraham's willingness and readiness to do the will of Hashem when he was in the middle of this process, about to sacrifice his son. So Hashem spoke to him through prophecy. Now, had he have done this act, perhaps we could say, had he have done this act, but had he been upset about it and depressed about this, having to do this, so he would have perhaps not been able to even receive the prophecy from God telling him to stop. So we can assume, based on the principles of prophecy, that he had to have been doing it the same way that he did anything else to serve Hashem. He was able to overcome his entire inner being and all of his feelings and emotions. Not to mention, Avraham specifically we call a man of chesed, a man of kindness, because his spiritual nature corresponded to the attribute of kindness. So he had to subdue that natural spiritual inclination of his to be only kind, to do such an act of sacrificing a child, which required strength and might, and he had to, awaken within him these midot as well, these attributes as well. So the challenge that he accomplished was a great, great challenge. Now, besides the practical story that we can appreciate and learn and take as a lesson to ourselves in order to arouse ourselves to serving Hashem properly, and this is certainly one of the reasons we read this in the morning, spiritually, there's another dimension to the story and to why it's here. It's taught that, of course, as we mentioned, Avraham corresponds to Chesed, and Yitzchak corresponds to Gvura. So, in essence, they really represent two opposites. Chesed is giving, it's kindness, it's revelation, it's the foundation of creation, as we've said. God's whole purpose of creation is just to do Chesed, to do kindness. Gevura, which means severity, strictness, or judgment, all of these are different functions of Gevura, is the opposite. That's where the concept of concealment comes in. Also, judgment, punishment. It's the opposite of Chesed. So, Avraham and Yitzchak represent, so to speak, two opposites on the spectrum. They're two opposite expressions of emotion, of Hashem, so to speak, because remember, they corresponded to the attributes of the divine attributes above. We say that they corresponded to the Chesed and Gevura spiritually as well. So the binding of Isaac in this context really takes on a whole new meaning. It really means that the idea of Chesed, the attribute of Chesed above, binding the attribute of Gevura. What is the purpose of that, and why is it so necessary, and what are the positive benefits? So Gevura onto itself can be harsh. We not necessarily can handle the full intensity of Gevura. So what we say is that, and this is learnt out from the Zohar actually brings this on the verse that mentions the birth of Yitzchak. It says that Yitzchak is the son of Avraham, and Avraham gave birth to Yitzchak. And this repetition over there is seemingly not necessary. So the Zohar on this point stresses why it was important to say that Yitzchak was in fact the son of Avraham. Actually, I think the verse says that Avraham gave birth to Yitzchak, and Yitzchak was the son of Avraham. That would be the correct order to say it. And Zohar asks, why do we have to go back and say that Yitzchak was the son of Avraham? So they want to express there that even though Yitzchak, which represents Gevura, and is the opposite attribute of Avraham, still the fact that Avraham gave birth to Yitzchak means that Yitzchak is in the end a result of Chesed. It's an outcoming of the Chesed. Now they explain there that the point is that to let us know that even though Yitzchak is Gevura, he was affected by coming through Avraham, in that Chesed had a effect on the Gevura, that the Gevura came out softened, or in the language of Kabbalah, sweetened. In that the Gevura wasn't harsh Gevura, wasn't harsh punishment and retribution, but rather the pure attribute of withdrawal, of holding back for the sake of positive things. And it's in fact through the midah of Yitzchak that the world is sustained in the best way possible. So Gevura, when it's affected by Chesed in the right way, and when it's a result of Chesed, like we see that Yitzchak came from Avraham, then we're not talking about a harsh punishing Gevura, which is too much for the world to bear, but rather we're talking about the world in its perfect state of balance. And ultimately, without Gevura, the world could not be sustained the way it is. Too much Chesed would be destructive. The Gemara and the rabbis tell us this in the concept of rain. Rain is the source of all life. It's clearly an expression of God's life-giving ability, which is Chesed. Yet the sages coined the phrase, they call rain the Gevurot Geshamim, the might of the rain. And they bring the term Gevura, which is severity, and they apply it to the term rain. We have to ask, why would you take something that is clearly the source of all life and connect it with Gevura? It should be connected with Chesed. So they explain that because just the pure Chesed of God, if that would be the manner in which He gave us rain, it would be too much. It would be destructive. It could be at the wrong times. And certainly if it was without limit, then the rain itself could be dangerous. Not only destructive in that the crops would be ruined, but could also be dangerous. We see in the world when there's too much of this power to give water that people die, unfortunately. So God gives the rain through the mechanism of Gevura to limit it, to control it. And ultimately we understand all things that God gives have to be controlled. Otherwise we would not be able to endure the intensity of this giving power. So without Gevura, we can't even have Chesed. And this is the deeper meaning behind that Avraham gave birth to Yitzchak, in that the Gevura that we need to experience is coming through Avraham. And this brings us to our point that the Akeidat Yitzchak, the binding of Isaac, essentially really represents this concept that we spoke out at length, that we need the attribute of Avraham, the Chesed, to be the overpowering or dominant function with how Gevura in the end will play itself out in the way that we experience it in the world. That's essentially the deeper meaning behind this whole story. And this becomes now a story of Hashem's attributes, the way that Hashem's right hand gives, but the left hand pushes away. When we have the perfect harmony between God's right and left, we have a world that can be sustained properly. And this is at the end, that's towards the end of the morning prayer of the first section, when we say Akeidat Yitzchak. So this is what we're trying to awaken, and this is what we're trying to fix, that the Gevura should be tempered.